Picture this. You arrive at what you think is your workplace. You knock, the door opens, and in that single moment, your life ends. On September 14, 2011, Romeca Blackmon made a simple mistake. She went to the wrong address. What should have been an ordinary day of housekeeping work became a nightmare that would expose the darkest corners of human paranoia and violence. This isn't a story about a criminal mastermind or a calculated killer. This is about fear, confusion, and a split-second decision that destroyed two families forever. What really happened when Romeca knocked on that door? And why did it cost her everything? Romeca Blackmon was 43 years old, a devoted mother, and a woman who believed in the dignity of hard work. She lived in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas, where she raised her children with love and determination. Friends described her as warm, dependable, and someone who lit up every room she entered. Romeca worked multiple cleaning jobs to support her family, never complaining about the long hours or physical demands. She took pride in her work, treating every client's home with respect and care. To her children, she was everything: provider, protector, and constant source of encouragement. Romeca's life wasn't glamorous, but it was filled with purpose and love. She represented countless working-class Americans who sacrificed daily for their families. But on September 14, 2011, her dedication would lead her to a stranger's door. And into unimaginable tragedy. September 14, 2011, started like any other Wednesday. Romeca received a call from her cleaning service about a new client in Lewisville, Texas. She was given an address, 369 Kingsbridge Drive. Romeca gathered her cleaning supplies, said goodbye to her family, and drove toward what she believed would be a routine job. The Lewisville neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined, typical suburban Texas. Nothing about this day seemed unusual or dangerous. Romeca had cleaned hundreds of homes before. She knew the routine. Arrive, introduce herself, get to work. But somewhere in the communication chain, something went terribly wrong. The address she'd been given was incorrect. Instead of 369 Kingsbridge Drive, she needed to go to 339 Kingsbridge Drive. The wrong house. Romeca pulled up to 369 Kingsbridge Drive around 1:30 p.m. The house looked ordinary, a single-story brick home with a neat lawn. She gathered her supplies and approached the front door, completely unaware that this was not her client's residence. This house belonged to Alfred Billy Smith Jr., a 44-year-old man who would later claim he was living in constant fear. Romeca knocked on the door. Inside, Smith heard the knocking. He wasn't expecting anyone. In his mind, this unexpected visitor represented a threat. Smith grabbed his .38 caliber revolver and approached the door. What happened next would be over in seconds, but its consequences would echo for years. The fatal encounter. When Smith opened the door, he saw Romeca standing there with her cleaning supplies. She likely started to introduce herself, perhaps beginning to explain that she was there to clean. But Smith didn't ask questions. He didn't seek clarification. According to his later testimony, he claimed Romeca lunged at him. Witnesses and evidence would later contradict this claim, but in that moment, Smith raised his gun. He fired. The bullet struck Romeca. She collapsed on his doorstep, fatally wounded. Smith immediately called 911, claiming he'd shot an intruder in self-defense. Romeca Blackmon, a hardworking mother who'd simply gone to the wrong address, lay dying. Her simple mistake had encountered his deadly fear, and only one of them would survive to tell their version of the story. Emergency services arrived at 369 Kingsbridge Drive within minutes of Smith's 911 call. Paramedics found Romeca Blackmon unresponsive on the front doorstep, a bullet wound to her torso. Despite desperate attempts to save her life, she was pronounced dead at the scene. Police immediately secured the area and began questioning Smith. He appeared cooperative, even calm, as he explained what happened. According to Smith, he'd been at home alone when he heard knocking. Fearful of intruders, he armed himself before answering. He claimed the woman at his door acted aggressively, forcing him to shoot in self-defense. Detectives examined the scene carefully. Romeca's cleaning supplies were scattered near her body: buckets, rags, spray bottles. Everything pointed to a housekeeper, not a threat. So why did Smith shoot? Piecing together the truth, Investigators quickly determined that Romeca had been sent to the wrong address. Her actual client lived at 339 Kingsbridge Drive, just 30 houses away. The mistake was simple, almost mundane, a transposed number in the address. Detectives contacted Romeca's cleaning service, which confirmed the mix-up. They interviewed the intended client, who was expecting Romeca that afternoon and was devastated to learn what happened. Witnesses in the neighborhood reported hearing a single gunshot but nothing that suggested a struggle or fight. Physical evidence at the scene contradicted Smith's claim that Romeca lunged at him. There were no defensive wounds on Smith, no signs of a physical altercation. The evidence suggested something far simpler and far more tragic: an innocent woman, shot for knocking on a door. Smith's background. Alfred Billy Smith Jr. had no prior criminal record. He lived alone and worked as a warehouse supervisor. Neighbors described him as quiet, private, someone who kept to himself. But investigators learned something troubling. Smith had a history of extreme paranoia about home invasions. He'd told acquaintances he feared being attacked in his own home. He kept multiple firearms in the house and had expressed deeply suspicious views about strangers. Some who knew him described an almost obsessive fear of crime, despite living in a relatively safe neighborhood. Psychologically, Smith appeared to be someone whose fear had overwhelmed his judgment. But would his fear be enough to justify killing an unarmed woman who knocked on his door? The legal question. Texas has strong castle doctrine laws that allow homeowners to use deadly force to defend their property against intruders. But legal experts immediately recognized a crucial distinction. Romeca never entered Smith's home. She knocked on his door during daylight hours, carrying cleaning supplies, presenting no visible threat. The castle doctrine typically applies to intruders who have forcibly entered a dwelling, not to someone knocking at the door. Prosecutors had to answer a fundamental question. Did Smith have a reasonable belief that his life was in danger? The investigation revealed that Smith opened the door voluntarily. Romeca didn't break in or force entry. She knocked, and he answered, with a gun already in his hand. The case would hinge on whether a reasonable person, in Smith's position, would have feared for their life. On September 15, 2011, just one day after the shooting, Alfred Billy Smith Jr. was arrested and charged with murder. The Denton County District Attorney's Office reviewed the evidence and concluded that Smith's actions did not constitute justifiable self-defense. The charge was serious: first-degree murder, carrying a potential sentence of life in prison. Smith was held on $100,000 bond. The community's reaction was swift and divided. Some believed Smith had every right to defend his home, citing Texas's strong property rights laws. Others were outraged that an innocent woman, guilty only of a clerical error, had been killed without any attempt at communication or de-escalation. Romeca's family demanded justice. But what would justice look like in a case built on fear and tragic misunderstanding? The defense strategy. Smith's defense attorneys argued that their client genuinely feared for his life. They painted a picture of a man alone in his home, frightened by an unexpected visitor, who made a split-second decision to protect himself. The defense emphasized Smith's lack of criminal history and positioned him as a law-abiding citizen exercising his constitutional right to self-defense. They prepared to argue that Texas's castle doctrine protected Smith's actions, even though Romeca never crossed his threshold. The defense also planned to present Smith's mental state, his documented fears about crime and home invasions, as evidence that he reasonably perceived a threat. Their strategy was clear: make the jury understand Smith's fear. But prosecutors had a compelling counter-argument: fear alone doesn't justify killing an innocent person. Prosecutors built their case around one undeniable fact: Romeca Blackmon posed no actual threat. She was a middle-aged woman carrying cleaning supplies in broad daylight. She knocked on a door, a completely ordinary action. The prosecution argued that Smith never attempted to verify who she was or what she wanted before shooting. He didn't ask questions through the door. He didn't call police about a suspicious person. He simply opened the door armed and fired. Forensic evidence showed Romeca was shot from a distance that contradicted Smith's claim of her lunging at him. Witnesses testified about Romeca's character, her kindness, her work ethic, her devotion to family. The prosecution's message was powerful: this wasn't self-defense. This was murder based on unfounded fear. The trial began in Denton County, Texas, in 2012. The courtroom was packed with Romeca's family, supporters, media, and community members deeply invested in the outcome. Prosecutors opened with a straightforward narrative. Romeca Blackmon went to work one day and was killed for making an innocent mistake. They described her life, her children waiting for her to come home, and the senseless violence that ended everything. The defense countered with their fear-based argument. They described Smith as a man exercising his fundamental right to protect himself in his own home, facing what he perceived as an uncertain and potentially dangerous situation. They emphasized the split-second nature of the decision. The battle lines were drawn. Was this murder or tragic self-defense? Romeca's family members took the stand, their testimony devastating. They described a loving mother stolen from them by violence. Her children spoke about the hole left in their lives, the birthdays and milestones she would never see. Forensic experts testified about the physical evidence. The bullet trajectory, the distance of the shot, and the lack of any defensive wounds on Smith all contradicted his claim of being attacked. Smith's own testimony became a focal point. He described his fear, his reasoning, his split-second decision. Under cross-examination, prosecutors pressed him. Why didn't you ask who was there? Why didn't you call police? Why did you open the door with a gun already drawn? Smith's answers would prove crucial to the jury's deliberations. After hearing all evidence and testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. Hours passed as they weighed the competing narratives of fear versus responsibility, self-defense versus murder. The jury's questions to the judge suggested they were struggling with the nuances of Texas self-defense law and whether Smith's actions met the legal threshold for justifiable homicide. Finally, they reached a verdict. The jury found Alfred Billy Smith Jr. guilty, not of murder, but of the lesser charge of manslaughter. The distinction was significant. Murder would have meant the jury believed Smith acted with malicious intent. Manslaughter meant they believed he acted recklessly, without reasonable justification, but without premeditated intent to kill. Smith was sentenced to 8 years in prison, a sentence that many felt was far too lenient for taking an innocent life. For Romeca Blackmon's family, no verdict could bring her back. Her children grew up without their mother's guidance and love. Family members spoke publicly about their grief and frustration with a legal system that seemed to value a homeowner's fear over an innocent woman's life. They established scholarships and community programs in Romeca's memory, determined that her death would not be forgotten. The family also became advocates for clearer guidelines about appropriate use of defensive force, particularly in cases where no actual threat exists. Their pain was compounded by knowing that Romeca's death resulted from such a simple, preventable mistake, a wrong address. How do you grieve when the reason for your loss is so senseless? The case sparked intense debate about stand your ground and castle doctrine laws. Legal experts pointed out that these laws, intended to protect homeowners from genuine threats, could be misused when fear, rather than actual danger, motivated violence. Civil rights organizations raised concerns about implicit bias, noting that Romeca was an African American woman and questioning whether race played an unspoken role in Smith's perception of threat. Some argued for modifications to self-defense laws requiring a reasonable duty to verify a threat before using deadly force. Others defended the laws as essential protections for homeowners. The conversation highlighted a fundamental tension in American society. How do we balance property rights with the protection of innocent life? The case revealed uncomfortable truths about fear, assumptions, and the deadly consequences when the two collide. Alfred Billy Smith Jr. served his 8-year sentence in a Texas state prison. Reports indicated he maintained that he acted in self-defense and feared for his life. He showed little public remorse, which further angered Romeca's family and supporters. The relatively short sentence, he would be eligible for parole consideration after serving half his term, struck many as grossly inadequate. Online communities and true crime followers debated the case endlessly. Some sympathized with Smith's fear. Most condemned his actions as reckless and unjustifiable. Upon his eventual release, Smith would return to a society that knew his name and the innocent woman whose life he took. But would he ever truly understand the magnitude of what he destroyed that September afternoon? The Lewisville community where the shooting occurred was deeply affected. Neighbors questioned their own assumptions about safety and threat. Many reflected on how quickly fear can escalate to tragedy. Community leaders organized dialogues about gun ownership, responsible self-defense, and the importance of communication before violence. Some homeowners reconsidered their own security practices, recognizing that not every unexpected knock represents danger. Churches and community centers held memorials for Romeca, celebrating her life and acknowledging the broader lessons her death offered. The case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked fear and the human cost of assumptions. Romeca's story reminded everyone that behind every news headline is a real person with family, dreams, and value. Her death challenged the community to choose understanding over fear. Romeca Blackmon's death raises profound questions about fear in contemporary America. Why do some people perceive ordinary situations as life-threatening? Media coverage of crime, despite falling crime rates in many areas, creates an atmosphere of constant danger. 24-hour news cycles amplify worst-case scenarios, making home invasions and violent crime seem more common than statistics support. This fear is particularly acute for some gun owners who view their weapons as necessary protection against exaggerated threats. Psychologists note that fear-based decision-making often bypasses rational thought, triggering fight or flight responses that can be deadly. Smith's extreme reaction to a knock on the door reflects broader cultural anxieties: fear of strangers, fear of crime, fear of the unknown. When did we become so afraid that a knock on the door justifies killing? Though not explicitly addressed at trial, the question of race looms over this case. Romeca Blackmon was a black woman. Alfred Smith was white. Research consistently shows that implicit bias affects threat perception. People are more likely to perceive black individuals as threatening in identical situations compared to white individuals. Did Smith's fear spike because of who he saw at his door? We cannot know his internal thoughts, but the question matters. Countless cases demonstrate how racial bias intersects with self-defense claims, often with tragic results. The legal system's willingness to accept fear-based justifications without examining the source of that fear enables these disparities. Romeca's family believed race played a role, though proving it legally is nearly impossible. The unspoken prejudices we carry can have fatal consequences. This case exposed significant flaws in how self-defense laws are applied. The jury's manslaughter verdict acknowledged that Smith's actions were unjustified, yet the 8-year sentence seemed inadequate for taking an innocent life. Legal scholars argue that self-defense laws need clearer standards for what constitutes reasonable fear. Should homeowners have a duty to attempt verbal communication before using deadly force against someone who hasn't entered their property? Should the castle doctrine apply to someone who voluntarily opens their door to a person outside? These questions remain largely unanswered, leaving room for future tragedies. The Blackmon case demonstrates that legal protections designed for genuine self-defense can shield reckless, fear-driven violence. Without reform, more innocent people will die for simply knocking on the wrong door. Tragically, Romeca Blackmon's case is not unique. In 2013, Renisha McBride, a 19-year-old black woman, was shot and killed after knocking on a stranger's door seeking help after a car accident. In 2023, Ralph Yarl, a black teenager, was shot after going to the wrong address to pick up his siblings. In 2023, Kaylin Gillis was killed when her friends pulled into the wrong driveway. These cases follow a disturbing pattern. Innocent people, often young and/or people of color, killed by homeowners who claimed fear without verifying any actual threat. Each case sparked outrage and calls for legal reform, yet the pattern continues. How many more innocent people must die before we demand better? Romeca Blackmon's family worked tirelessly to ensure she would be remembered as more than a victim. They shared stories of her humor, her strength, and her unwavering commitment to her children. Friends recalled her infectious laugh and the way she made everyone feel valued and heard. Her children honored her memory by pursuing education and careers, living the successful lives she wanted for them. Community members established the Romeca Blackmon Memorial Fund to support single mothers pursuing vocational training and employment. Annual memorial events brought together those who knew her and those who simply wanted to honor her memory and acknowledge the injustice of her death. Through these efforts, Romeca's humanity remained central to the story. She was not just a tragedy, she was a person, loved and irreplaceable. Romeca's family became vocal advocates for reforming self-defense laws and addressing implicit bias in threat perception. They worked with civil rights organizations to push for legislation requiring homeowners to attempt de-escalation before using deadly force in non-intrusion situations. They supported training programs for gun owners emphasizing threat assessment and conflict resolution. They partnered with community groups addressing racial bias and promoting dialogue across cultural divides.